All right, everyone. Looks like we've given a few extra minutes for everybody to get on and register, so I think we're ready to get started. Again, my name is Adam Ritzek, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar titled Improve Profit and Customer Satisfaction Through More Effective Management of LTL Carriers. This will be presented by Gene Graves. Gene is the Executive Director of the United Shippers Alliance. A couple quick notes here before we get started. For today's webinar, for everyone to be aware of audio options. You may use your computer's audio dial-in, which I'm sure by now you have figured out. But again, those are the options you have for this. And if you wish to dial in or switch over, there's some information listed there in order to do so. And then also, we ask that all attendees please be sure to keep their microphones on mute for the entire length of the webinar. And any comments or questions you may have, please enter into the questions box. After Gene's presentation, we will do a short Q&A session, which at that time he can address any questions you may have at that time. So with that said, I'd like to turn it over to Gene Graves. Gene?
Thank you, Adam, and thanks to everyone who's in attendance today. First slide we have here is one that shows me. I'm not going to go through the whole slide, but just to give you an idea of my background, I've been doing transportation pricing since 1965. Started out with a Class 1 railroad in their pricing department and have worked for several companies all doing pricing. I've done everything from expedited letters all the way up to chartering full ships. Here's a list of the items on our webinar agenda today. We're going to go through most of this on the LTL side. Wanted to give a quick overview, and I'm going to try to keep it quick, of the United Shippers Alliance. How we work, we're basically a nonprofit shipper association organized in 1996 as a result of a Columbus, Ohio Chamber of Commerce initiative. Again, we are a nonprofit, one of only about 10 shipper associations left. We have two major programs, one full container load ocean program and our LTL program, which we'll talk about today. Our primary function, though we do a lot of different things, is in item number 1 there, where we take the volumes of our members and collectively use that as leverage to negotiate competitive pricing with our carrier base. Quick look here at our LTL partners and our ocean partners. This is not all of them, but a selective list. And what we do is try to not get every carrier so that we don't dilute down our leverage with the carriers, but we try to work only with quality carriers that will provide a good pricing and good service to our members. A real quick look at some of our current members. We have a diversity of products, which most shipper associations don't. They are single focus, such as toys or alcoholic liquors or lumber, such things like that. We are a generic products, so a whole list of different products there. And we have national coverage. Just real quick, Appleton Papers is in Wisconsin. Atkins is in Colorado with their manufacturing facility in Indiana. Clark Equipment is in Kentucky. International Fibers in New York. Mitsubishi Food is in New Jersey. And Nature's Therapy and Pullman Hold are both down in Florida. So that's a quick look at us. We have over 100 members and nearly 100 million in aggregate freight spend. Get started on the LTL side. Let's talk about the current health of the LTL industry. Here's a slide that has 4 different graphs on it, and sometimes those get very difficult to work at, so we're going to not do a whole lot of detail look on that. So let's start with the statement at the bottom. LTL carriers show year-over-year gains, but the pace of improvements is slowing. A key one, look at one of the graph in the upper right-hand corner, which deals with operating ratios. If you look back the end of 2008, the beginning of 2009, operating ratios were averaging way over 100, meaning that they were spending more than they were bringing in. If you look at the trend line since then, it is a downward trend line, which means they are beginning to make a little bit of profit. You can sure see how choppy it is, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And currently, they're somewhere around the 96 6% operating ratio, which means they're getting a 4% return, which most companies would not be satisfied with that return. There are carriers out there who are doing much, much better than that. Old Dominion and Roadrunner are two that are doing very, very good. Next slide covers a look at the cost structure. And again, let's look at the statement at the bottom. Since the LTL industry has recovered to normal capacity utilization levels, prices will be vulnerable to any significant increase in demand, which could happen the end of 2013. In fact, I think we all look forward to it happening, whether it's 2013 or now. I want to take a couple of looks at some of the color bars up here. Looking at the blue bar, which is for labor. If you look from 2007 to 2012, that's a pretty steady line that goes across there. So there really hasn't been any major increase in the labor activity. The second one, which I think is really important, is the red bars, which cover the overhead. 2007, 2008, you can see those were even more than the labor cost. So the carriers had to do something. Since there wasn't going to be more volume, they had to do something internally to reduce their own internal costs. So starting in 2009, you see that shrink. 2010, 2011, 2012, the overhead is now just a small amount of what of labor of what it was back in 2007, 2008. At the top in the green is fuel, and that goes up and down, and that can be volatile. Then I want to point out the margin, which is the black, and if you look carefully, there is a thin black line on there, meaning the carriers are not making much profit off of this, as we discussed, about 4% on the margins there. Next section, major LTL industry trends. And I want to remind you that we will have a Q&A at the end, so if you have any questions, please go ahead and put those in the box, and we'll answer those at the end of the presentation. Shipper trends impacting LTL pricing. First trend, we've all seen that, is people going into lean manufacturing, minimal inventories, keeping costs down. But that means that there will be smaller and more frequent shipments to their customer base. And that tends to push into the LTL side. Trend number two, which is tied to number one, is the regional distribution networks are now coming back. It happens in business. We go consolidate, deconsolidate, consolidate, deconsolidate. Now we're in that deconsolidation mode where we're putting the inventory close to the customers. Again, that means quick deliveries and smaller shipments. Third trend is carrier sustainability, increasing influence in those shippers' buying decisions, meaning that you pick carriers that are going to meet your price service needs and not just necessarily on the price side, because customer service becomes a very key factor. Trend number four is the precision and predictability of transportation network, which is an increasing competitive factor. Customers want things delivered on time and claim-free. So sometimes using the lesser quality carriers, you don't get that opportunity. Looking at LTL carrier trends for 2013, trend number one is really going to be a key item. Density-based pricing will start to make inroads in the LTL industry later in the year. The national motor freight classification is now doing a lot of changes, going away from a fixed single class for a product into density-based, where as the density gets lower, the pricing gets higher. We have a member who ships shoes. 1937 was the last time that the NMFC had reviewed the classification on shoes. Obviously, at that time, they were heavy leather shoes, and now we're into sneakers and flip-flops, which are a lot less weight. So they converted over from a single flat classification for all shoes and boots to density-based. Our particular members' pricing, LTL pricing, went up 40%, and we had to make some adjustments on that. We've also had the same thing done with a member who does commercial vacuum cleaners and floor buffers. It went from a single class to multiple classes. And just recently, We have a member who ships computers and electronic computers, and the same thing happened there. They went from a single class to a multiple classes based upon the density of the actual shipments. And that's causing a lot of our members to have to look at density where they never did before. And we'll talk about some of that as we go on too. Trend number 2, the driver shortage will hit the LTL industry, but not too hard. The truckload side has been involved in a lot of driver shortage, driver turnover. Some truckload carriers have in excess of 100% turnover in a year time. We refer to that as churning. The LTL industry is a little bit more stable in that most cases they have regular routes, so they're home more frequently, and the pay is still pretty good. So as the economy picks up and the demand picks up for LTL, there will be a push to go out and get drivers. So we see that as a short-term shortage until the LTL carriers actually get enough carriers to take care of the demand. Trend number 3, LTL prices will continue to increase slightly. Carriers are still focusing on profit. Again, if you're looking at an average of a 4% return, that's not good. They'd like to get something much greater. We mentioned a couple of carriers that were very profitable. They're down in the mid-80s instead of a 96% OR. Trend number 4 is LTL carrier consolidation. Will mean fewer carriers with bigger footprints. We've seen some consolidation going on over the last 30 or 40 years, so that the number of actual major LTL carriers is much smaller than it used to be. Currently, the top 25 carriers handle about 90% of the total LTL shipments, public shipments in the U.S. We also see this to be done more by acquisition than by actual merger. Several carriers are now doing strategic acquisitions that will improve their total coverage. Last trend, and we've all seen the gasoline prices jump up and continue to jump up, and the same thing's happening in the diesel side. Diesel prices are expected to remain high all the way through 2013 and into 2014. That can change on a moment's notice with something in the Middle East or something happens in the U.S. to increase the amount of oil available to the refineries. Diesel in just the last 5 weeks has increased 26.3 cents, which is a 6.8% jump in just 5 weeks, and we don't expect that to go back down to any extent anytime soon. Next section will be the factors impacting your LTL pricing. And for those of you who are not directly involved in LTL pricing, some of this will really sound weird, and to those of you who are involved in it, you will understand how weird it is. The first item up here is the LTL rate structures. It has 3 major components, different products with rate classifications, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Different distances. Basically, LTL pricing, LTL costs are based on fixed cost and variable costs. That first mile is expensive, the last mile is expensive. Whether you're shipping a 150-pound skid or a 6,000-pound skid, you pretty much have the same cost for those 2 skids. And then you have the differential being the distance moved, and that's a variable cost. And then the third thing in here, of course, is the difference in weights. A 150-pound shipment versus a 6,000-pound shipment, you're going to get some advantages by taking one skid with a much heavier weight. Carrier tariffs are published on these 3 factors, where a price per 100 pounds is listed for each classification and an origin-destination pairing, generally done by zip code. When we look at the factors determining what goes into a freight classification, what does the National Motor Freight Classification Committee look at? There's really about 12 different items. 4 of the biggest are density, the pounds per cubic foot, the storability, how much space is it taking up, how much extra room is left to do something else. For example, you could have a 5-foot wide skid and an 8-foot trailer, so you only have 3 feet left. You can't put a standard a 4-foot skid beside it. You may be able to put some smaller items in there, but that limits the amount of space that's available to the carriers to put product in. Or you could have a 6-foot tall skid, which means that the carriers who have these pallet racks that will allow them to divide the trailer height in half and put down flooring that the skids could be put on a second tier. That again improves the storability factor. And then the ease or difficulty in handling. Obviously, every carrier prefers a perfect 40 by 44 inch skid and weighing several thousand pounds. But then you also end up with a lot of loose products that are banded together, or drums that are placed with not on skids but are shipped loose. And that again affects the storability and the ease of handling of the product in the trailer. And last, of course, is the liability to damage and theft. If you're shipping a product that is $3 a pound versus one that is $100 a pound, that obviously makes a difference in what they look at in case of a claim, either loss or theft. Then you factor in that there is a discount level negotiated between the carrier and the shipper, and these are generally quoted as percentage discounts from the published carrier's tariff. And I need to point out that no two carriers have the same rate basis. So you could have one carrier with an 80% discount and have lower base rates, and they could actually be better than the one who has an 83 or an 84% discount, but their base rates are really, really high. So the discount is important, but the base rate is obviously a big factor in determining what your pricing is going to be. And again, that gets complicated for the non-transportation person. And that's not enough. You've got several other factors you need to take into account. Minimum shipment charges. Again, we talked about the 150-pound skid, and the fixed cost on that is the same as a 6,000-pound skid. So what's happening is the carriers now, in order to increase their profitability, are taking a real hard look at the minimum charges, and there's a big push by the LTL carriers to make those minimum shipments cover all the cost. So therefore, when we used to talk about it, I can remember a $30 and $40 skid minimum charge. Now we're talking, in some cases, in excess of $100 for a minimum skid charge. The next factor that comes in is the accessorial charges, and that includes such things as calling ahead to make an appointment, lift gates if they're required. Residential deliveries are really becoming an important factor. There's so much internet sales going on right now. What's happened is companies have decided, rather than go through a distributor, we're going to do direct sales, which means we're going to be delivering straight to the end user. So we're seeing a lot more companies now doing residential deliveries, and there's a cost for that. Rarely will a carrier totally waive a cost, but we can mitigate those costs down. And then we're also seeing a lot of sort and segregate at the retail receivers, where they're requiring the LTL carrier to actually not only unload the product, but to take it, sort it out, and segregate it into different items and different products. And then last, fuel surcharges. We've talked about that and how important that factor is. And what companies need to do to mitigate their LTL shipping costs is to find a way to soften that cost and the volatility of the diesel surcharges. We do that by having our own fuel surcharge scale that's based upon blocks of prices, as opposed to every week making a change on every 1/10 of a cent that happens. The next slide is really pretty self-explanatory. What we've seen in the LTL industry for the last 5 years, a lot of excess capacity, high depth, fierce competition, market instability, and all of that means that there's low prices out there, and that means high operating cost. LTL carriers have had to address these issues. Earlier we saw where they did a lot of changes on their administrative side, their overhead side, and that was one of the ways that they could do that internally. And then the other way is increase revenues. Much as the federal government's looking now to find ways to meet their goals of revenue, they're looking at some tax increases and also how to cut back on some costs. The LTL carriers and many other companies have done that for the last several years. Next slide, the resulting change in LTL pricing. Item number one, LTL carriers have been forced to become more disciplined in their pricing decisions. And for anyone who is looking to have the carriers look at their current LTL pricing, either on a bid package or an individual carrier basis, the more accurate shipping data you can provide the carrier, the better you can negotiate pricing. A couple of key items that not everyone has is a good set of historical shipping data. It doesn't have to be for a long period like a year, but it does need to be for some period that's good and representative, whether that's 2 weeks or a month or what. But you need some good shipping data so that they can enter that into their costing model to see how things go. Obviously, you need the weight of the shipment and the actual class of the shipment. And then, as we've been discussing, density is really becoming a key factor. Most companies have not in the past kept track of their density. So what you're having to do is to either have the carrier come out and do a study where they'll do some actual measurements, or just to go over a group of shipments the next week. They will measure every shipment that takes place, and then come up with a density range that they have in the shipments. The second item on there, carriers are beginning to align pricing with current day cost structure. From March 2009 to mid-2012, the LTL cost actually went up 27%, but the LTL pricing went up only 12.6%. So there's a 15% gap there that the carriers are now trying to recover. The new way that they're doing that recovery is the next item, which is yield management, meaning revenue per 100 pounds. In the past, carriers were really looking for market share. You could tell them, hey, I've got $100,000 worth of LTL, and I can give you 50,000 of that, and they would use that to kind of look at what kind of discount they'll give you. That's no longer the case. Carriers now are taking a good hard look at the yield, how much revenue per 100 pounds is that going to give to us assigned to the truck. So that's becoming a major driver, and not just focusing on market share anymore. Last time on there, most carriers have implemented accounting systems that provide a more accurate view of operating ratios. I know of several carriers that we've dealt with that had absolutely no costing model. They were dealing strictly on revenue. We get enough revenue, we're sure to make some money. Those carriers now have had to go out and invest in a costing model, and we always have to make sure that the right data is entered into a costing model. For example, we had one member where the carrier said, well, their pounds per cubic foot was X, and it was a lot lower than we had looked at several years ago. So we actually had the carrier come in and do the study so that they could go back and change the numbers that they had in their costing model. So it's always good to make sure that the carriers are putting in good data. I mean, garbage in, garbage out. You can see that where that would hurt your pricing and pricing activity. Next slide. Again, I'm not going to go through the whole slide. I think the statement at the bottom is sufficient. LTL rates should hold at a 4 to 5% increase level until the truckload shortages accelerate in 2013. Once they have to go out and get more drivers, And the way they do that is to pay. So that makes the costs go up, and they've got to pass that on if they want to remain competitive. The last section we're going to talk about strategies and tactics to reduce your LTL costs. LTL management process, basically you take the carrier negotiations and the multiple carrier contracts and the carrier routing by lane, which is very important, and you throw that in together and become a carrier performance management program where you're actually managing the carriers and not just laying back and letting things happen. We're going to go through 12 ways to reduce your LTL costs. Item number 1, you need to benchmark your current costs, as a baseline. That goes back to the old statement, I can't manage what I can't measure. So you need to have a starting point. You need to have a measuring stick, and then you can use that as you go forward. Some things will affect that. I mean, you could have a market change where you add a location or subtract a location, and that could increase or decrease your benchmark. But for overall comparisons, it's a good way to do that. Item number 2, maximize and aggregate your shipping volumes when negotiating with LTL carriers. Use only the number of carriers that are necessary. I've seen some members, some companies we've dealt with, who would have a large number of carriers. I'm talking about 15 or more when they did not have the volume that justified that. What we generally recommend is you set up a base of core carriers at each location. You can do one national carrier for all your locations, and then you set up 2 or 3 regional carriers at each of your locations. That way, you're taking the volume you have and maximizing the impact that the volume has on the LTL pricing. We're one step beyond that, where we're taking everybody's volume and using that to do our price negotiations. Next item, which is still very good, and it's very commonly used, is what we call shipper-concentric rate tariff that allows easy carrier rate comparison. You can either do that with a neutral rate base, such as Zarlite, or you can select a single carrier rate base and have everybody priced off the same one. The advantages of that is that everybody's working off the same rate basis, so you don't have the ups and downs that you would have dealing with multiple carriers. And then you can say this discount is this much versus that discount, and then it becomes pretty easy which carrier you select out of that. We're going to talk about transportation management systems in a moment, and that can have an impact on actually doing a better job than the single rate base. Item number 4, utilize lane matching to align your high volume lanes with the carrier's soft lanes. All carriers have front hauls and back hauls. Front hauls they got too much of, and they price it the higher. Back hauls they need to get some equipment moved out of an area, so they're pricing that lower. Every carrier has those, so if you're looking at individual carriers' tariffs, you'll be able to take advantage of that versus using the shipper's concentric rate tariff. The next item on here, number 5, is to negotiate simple, favorable accessorial terms in pricing. I think the 2 key words are simple and favorable. Most carriers on accessorials, again, do not like to waive them. Some things they can waive that are low-cost items. Other things you would have to mitigate it down. And favorable, one of the big items is, for example, most carriers on their lift gate charge a price per 100 pounds. So it's not fixed. You're paying more for every 100 pounds you ship. Most carriers, if not all carriers, are agreeable to some mitigated lower flat fee, so that when you're costing it out, you can cost it out and say it is X number of dollars that will go into the lift gate. Item number 6, very much the same thing, simple and favorable fuel surcharges. Again, the the carriers' fuel surcharge scales are weighted in their favor, and some carriers use them actually as a profit center. So you need to get with the carriers and understand more about what they have built into their costing model, and then come up with a fuel surcharge scale of your own to use, and that can go a long way in minimizing your LTL cost. Number 7 is review your minimum order size and frequent policies in an attempt to maximize shipment size. Transportation people, of course, have no say in this. That goes back to the sales side. I've seen, looking at the shipments from some of our members, where they would ship a minimum charge shipment in the morning to a customer at a certain location, and then they would ship a minimum charge shipment to the same customer, same location that afternoon. So they're paying 2 minimum charges when, if there was a way to combine those, that they would be able to save money on their transportation costs. I know of one company that their customer service people, when they are entering an order, and the order comes up at a weight that's close to a weight break point for the LTL carriers. For example, 1,800 pounds. If you have a shipment of 1,800 pounds, you're going to be paying as if it was 2,000 pounds. So what the customer service person does then is say, here, if you want to order another 200 pounds, that the shipping would be free on that 200 pounds. So there's ways to do that will increase your profitability. Item number 8 is explore load consolidation or pool points to possibly build larger shipments. This has really been used a lot in the small package parcel side, where what's what they call zone hopping, where they would take a bunch of small package shipments, put them on one skid, ship it from Ohio to California, and then make the deliveries out there. And the result is a big decrease in your transportation costs on the small package side. Number 9, explore TMS, Transportation Management System software, to maximize load assignment and routing compliance. For any kind of volume shippers, this is absolutely a necessity. And what the advantage you gain here versus the shipper-concentric single rate base is that you are able to put all the carriers' pricing in place, and the TMS will pull it up, rank it from lowest to highest, so that you're being able to take advantage of what we call the soft lanes, or the backhaul lanes, so that one carrier may be a good carrier to that state, but that's not necessarily the best carrier to use for that particular lane. And there's a multitude of TMS software available out there, but again, we recommend that people, particularly with any volume, take a look at doing that. Item number 10 is review the product vendor terms to identify opportunities to unbundle the product and the freight cost to see if your transportation rates are more competitive. Again, this is something that the transportation department normally can't handle. That has to be done through the purchasing people. For a long time, I've used the statement prepaid NAD as a license to steal. I've seen it done in shipping departments where shipment comes up, it's prepaid NAD, so it's not coming out of our pocket. So I'm going to use this carrier who I know is higher, but he brings me pizzas, or I get to go to the baseball game with him. So have the purchasing people actually have the shipments quoted both ways, FOB origin with freight collect, or on a prepaid NAD basis what the charges would be. That is an area that a lot of companies are missing out on some LTL and truckload savings. Item number 11, review your packaging to identify opportunities to create denser shipments. That is really going to become more and more important again as the density-based pricing comes into effect. You want to make sure you protect the product, but you don't want to overbuild the packaging side of it. And again, that's not necessarily done by the transportation shipping department. That's more in line with what's done with the engineering of the packaging within the company. Item number 12 is don't be afraid to change carriers if price and the service currently are not meeting your standards. What we always recommend is you need to check out to see if there are any other opportunities out there to reduce your price and still maintain your service levels. And then we say set up a program with that carrier, dip your toe in the water and try it for a month or 2 months or 3 months and see if the service levels that they have are sufficient to meet your price service needs. That pretty much takes care of the presentation.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Gene. Now it's time for a Q&A session that we have overall here. So just going to go over a couple of questions that came in and pass them over to you to answer, Gene. A couple items early on came in about wanting to understand a little bit more about a Shippers Association. So one of the first questions received is what is a Shippers Association?
Okay, we're a small unknown animal out there. Like I say, currently there's only about a dozen, 10 to 12 of us left that are nonprofit shipper associations. It is a legal entity that allows small, mid-sized, large shippers all to go together and collectively negotiate the competitive pricing based upon the volume of the entire entity. We were organized in 1996 and did our due diligence on what makes a shipper association successful, and we're considered one of the most successful left in the U.S. So it's basically we are considered a rate negotiator, and it's basically, again, to negotiate pricing. We don't get involved in any of the payment terms, so we don't handle anybody's money. All the billing goes direct to our members. But it is a legal entity that will allow shippers to go together and collectively negotiate pricing. No member is allowed to run an organization, so that's why the United Shippers Alliance was set up as a separate operation with no shipper as the lead person on the administration side.
Okay, and again for the audience, if you have any last-minute questions, please enter those into the questions box available. As a follow-up to that first question, Gene, I had a question about, based on the items we talked about during today's presentation, how can a shippers association help people with the items discussed today?
Okay. Again, because we're using the leverage of our entire membership and their volumes to negotiate pricing, we're able to do things that individual companies, particularly small and middle-sized companies, can't do. For example, our favorable fuel surcharge scale, which runs about 50% of the normal scale. Small and middle-sized companies can't do that because they don't have sufficient volume to do that. And we see small, middle-sized companies reducing their LTL freight costs 25 to 35, 40%. Even large companies that we've done some LTL pricing for, because of some of the favorable activities that we have, we're saving 3 to 5 to 7%, but it's on a much larger dollar amount. So the biggest thing that we offer, being a rate negotiator shipper association, is the fact that we can reduce cost to our members. In addition to that, we're always available to handle anything on claims or any systemic problems that come up with a particular carrier. And we provide information back to our membership, both on the LTL and the ocean side, to keep them in tune with what's going on in the industry. So that's the biggest thing we do is, of course, price reductions. Okay,
there does not seem to be any other questions that have come in, so I think that will close the Q&A portion here. As a reminder to all attendees, we will be sending a follow-up email out tomorrow that will also include a link to this webinar if you'd like to view again, and we will also have this posted shortly on the unitedshippers.org website.
This is Gene Graves, and thank you everybody that attended today. Hopefully we provided some information that was useful for you. Thank you very much.